Pam Bondi interrupted Jasmine Crockett on live TV, assuming she could silence her. What she didn't expect was a calm, fact-based response that shifted the tone of the entire room and the internet within moments. The lights were bright. The studio air felt heavy, the way it often does when something larger is building beneath the surface. No one said it directly, but it was clear. It was a live panel, the kind where voices overlap while discussing politics, policy, and responsibility. But this time carried a different level of tension. The topic was criminal justice reform. The guest list already looked intense on paper, and felt even more so once everyone took their seats. On the left was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas, known for her sharp reasoning, direct delivery, and straightforward communication that doesn't rely on rehearsed lines. On the right sat Florida's former Attorney General Pam Bondi, a familiar figure in conservative legal circles and someone who rarely steps away from public attention. The network had promoted this exchange all week. Two strong voices, opposing viewpoints, national television. You could almost picture the producers backstage anticipating a heated exchange. Jasmine remained composed. She carried a level of focus that often leads others to underestimate her, largely because she doesn't raise her voice. Her team had advised her to expect resistance, possibly even dismissiveness. She stayed unfazed. She had faced tougher challenges in courtrooms and even more difficult moments in private. Bondi arrived with a confident posture. She smiled, though it appeared controlled, like someone aware the audience might be uncertain but still determined to win them over. She scanned the room, acknowledging familiar faces, clearly preparing for a performance rather than a dialogue. The segment opened with a light question directed at Bondi, something about recent sentencing disparities in Florida. Her response was polished and carefully framed for a broad audience. She emphasized law and order, personal responsibility, and what she described as a culture becoming too lenient. She spoke around the deeper issues without directly addressing them. No one interrupted. Then the question moved to Crockett. The moderator asked her to respond to bias within the justice system. Jasmine leaned forward slightly. Her tone was calm, direct, and measured. She cited data, real figures, showing that black defendants in the same counties often received harsher sentences than white defendants for the same offenses. She explained how cash bail systems keep low-income individuals detained while wealthier defendants are able to leave. She wasn't emotional. She didn't need to be. Her argument was based on evidence. Just as she began to develop her point, Bondi interrupted. "No disrespect, Congresswoman, but that's simply not accurate," she said, gesturing dismissively. "You're selecting statistics and overlooking the actual causes of crime." The moderator attempted to intervene, but Bondi continued. "People are tired of this narrative. Tired of blaming the system. Maybe it's time we focus on accountability." The studio fell quiet. Crockett's expression remained unchanged, no visible reaction. Viewers at home leaned in. Bondi smiled, likely believing she had made a strong point, but Crockett's stillness suggested something else. She wasn't shaken. She was evaluating. The moderator stepped in. "Let's allow Congresswoman Crockett to respond." That was when the tone shifted. Before speaking, Jasmine adjusted her microphone, not because it needed adjustment, but because a brief pause was enough to gather her thoughts. Not that she needed much time. She had experienced moments like this before, maybe not this exact stage, but certainly in rooms where people in authority tried to present her as emotional, uninformed, or unqualified. Those attempts never worked, though they appeared repeatedly. She looked straight ahead, not at Bondi, not at the cameras. Her voice stayed calm and exact. "Let me be clear," she said. Nothing she presented was theory or opinion. Every point came directly from Department of Justice data, sentencing project research, and verified court records. If this discussion was going to continue, it couldn't start by ignoring facts. Pam Bondi blinked, possibly surprised that Jasmine didn't respond defensively, perhaps expecting that reaction. But Crockett wasn't there to argue emotionally. She was there to present her points clearly. "You say people are tired of this narrative," Jasmine continued. "But the only people who seem tired of it are those who never had to experience it." There was a brief pause, uncommon for live television. Then she continued, "You want to discuss accountability? I fully support accountability," she said. "So let's begin with police departments that fail to report use of force data. The prosecutors who pressure innocent people into plea deals to increase conviction rates. The judges who sentence teenagers as adults simply because their zip code doesn't match yours." Bondi shifted in her chair, her smile tightening. But she didn't withdraw. She interrupted again, more sharply this time. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, I've spent my career putting criminals behind bars who damage their own communities. If you want to talk about justice, start there." Her words carried weight, not necessarily because they were accurate, but because they were strategic. Shift responsibility. Frame the issue as personal failure. Position yourself as the responsible voice in the room. It was a familiar political approach. Jasmine didn't respond to the tactic. "What you just described is exactly the issue," she replied. "You talk about incarceration, but you don't address what people act long before they broke any law. You focus on punishment, but not prevention. You measure justice through imprisonment, not opportunity." Bondi tried to speak again, but the moderator finally stepped in. "Let's stay on topic, please." But by then, the shift was already clear. Viewers in the studio and at home had noticed it. Bondi entered the discussion intending to control it. Crockett wasn't defending herself. She was reframing the conversation, and she wasn't finished. "You can't fix a system if you refuse to admit it's broken," Jasmine said, now looking directly into the camera. "And you can't lead on justice if you believe that acknowledging racism creates division." A few quiet reactions moved through the audience. Behind the glass, a producer even dropped a pen. Bondi didn't respond. For the first time, she seemed to have something to say, but chose not to. This wasn't how she expected the segment to unfold. Throughout the exchange, Crockett kept her tone steady. She didn't raise her voice or change her pace. That consistency made her words more precise. She wasn't trying to create a viral moment. She was presenting facts. And as she continued, it became clear how rare it is to see someone challenge authority calmly without stepping back to keep others comfortable. Because in reality, some environments must become uncomfortable before improvement can happen. But this wasn't the peak of the discussion. It was only the first signal. You could sense it. A quiet shift, not in volume, but in focus. As people processed her words, Bondi leaned back slightly. Her usual confidence, the smooth delivery, the quick interruptions, they no longer carried the same impact. She crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. She looked off stage, possibly toward a producer or staff member. It seemed like she was searching for control, but it was no longer present in the room. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett remained completely still. She wasn't reacting with satisfaction or smiling. She understood better than to assume anything too early. Moments like these are uncertain. One wrong tone, one poorly timed remark, and the entire narrative can shift. She wasn't going to take that risk, not in this moment. The moderator, aware of the growing tension that could either escalate or settle, attempted to guide the discussion back on track. "Let's shift focus a bit. Attorney General Bondi, how do you respond to critics who say your office has repeatedly resisted efforts to increase transparency in sentencing?" Pam forced a brief smile. "That's simply not accurate," she said. "Our office has always been open to reform. Real reform, not political posturing, but we are not going to compromise public safety for appearances." It was a polished answer, firm and controlled. But the moment had already moved beyond her. She could sense it. The audience no longer leaned in when she spoke. They were waiting for what Jasmine would say next. Crockett didn't interrupt. She waited, let Bondi finish, allowed a short pause, and then asked, without accusation or theatrics, "What exactly do you mean by real reform?" Bondi paused. "Well, for starters, we're supporting data sharing across jurisdictions. We've expanded our youth diversion programs." Jasmine stepped in politely, but firmly. "Programs your office supported only after public pressure and 2 investigative reports." It was another precise correction. Crockett wasn't making broad claims. She was presenting specific facts, pointing out inconsistencies one by one. Bondi released a slow breath. almost a sigh. "You know what I think," she said. "I think people like you focus more on the narrative than the actual solution." The statement was meant to shift the framing, to present Crockett as an idealist, someone who talks more than delivers. But Jasmine had heard this argument before. The idea that passion and competence cannot exist together, especially when directed at someone like her, was familiar. She smiled, not for approval, but to show she recognized the approach. "I care about the solution," she responded. "I just don't believe in solving the wrong problem." The moderator looked ready to move to a commercial break. The control room was likely signaling him to transition, but he allowed the discussion to continue. The moment carried weight. Jasmine leaned slightly forward, as if addressing viewers directly. "You want to know what real reform is?" she asked. "It's a system where zip codes don't determine outcomes, where prosecutors don't treat public defenders as obstacles, where a public defender isn't responsible for 150 clients and still goes home wondering who they couldn't help." She paused. "Real reform," she added, "is when judges can't justify longer sentences based on assumptions that someone will reoffend, when decisions are based on evidence, not fear." The audience grew quiet again, not out of discomfort this time, but focus. Pam opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. Perhaps she needed a moment to regroup, or perhaps she didn't have a clear reply ready. The moderator, watching the time, attempted once more to redirect. "Let's move to community policing." But before he could finish, Jasmine raised her hand, not to interrupt, but to complete her point. "And real reform," she said, "means you don't silence the people closest to the problem just because their experiences make you uncomfortable." It wasn't delivered for effect. She wasn't performing. She was building a clear argument, step by step. What followed was not just explanation. It was direct engagement. Jasmine allowed a brief silence, so her last point could settle. Then she looked directly at Pam Bondi. Not with hostility or sarcasm, but with intention. The tone of someone unwilling to avoid the central issue. "You know," Jasmine said, "there's something personal in the way you talk about communities like mine." Bondi's expression tightened. She wasn't used to being addressed this directly on air. "You keep referring to neighborhoods affected by crime," Jasmine continued. "But you don't acknowledge what shaped those conditions in the first place. Redlining, underfunded schools, over-policing, predatory lending. You talk about law and order, but ignore the history that disrupted that order long before." The moderator leaned back. This wasn't the kind of exchange he typically managed. He glanced toward the control room again, but no one stopped the broadcast. Pam leaned forward, her voice more rigid now. "I've spent years working with law enforcement to reduce crime rates," she said. "I'm not here to be lectured about past policies that have nothing to do with today's issues." Jasmine blinked once. Her voice lowered slightly, still steady. "You think redlining is outdated?" she asked. "The last active redline loan maps weren't phased out until the late 1980s, and you believe systemic bias is no longer relevant. Your own office opposed a bill last year that required collecting racial disparity data in traffic stops." That statement caught Bondi off guard. She leaned back, her jaw tightening slightly as she searched for a response. "You called it unnecessary government overreach," Jasmine added. "But let me say it clearly for everyone watching. You didn't want the data." The atmosphere in the studio shifted again. Viewers in cities like Toledo, Fresno, Shreveport, and Worcester remained engaged, not because of tension, but because of something less common: direct communication without exaggeration. Bondi made another attempt. "I stand by the work my office has done to keep families safe." Jasmine responded, without hesitation. "You think safety only comes from more prisons?" she asked. "I believe safety means a parent isn't forced to choose between rent and bail. Safety means a teenager doesn't grow up thinking a simple traffic stop could become dangerous. Safety means justice doesn't depend on income." Pam's expression remained firm, but it was clear she understood that each of her responses was now part of a discussion she was no longer directing. Jasmine leaned back slightly. "I've met mothers who never received a return call after their son was taken into custody. I've worked on cases where evidence sat untouched, because the defendant didn't have a lawyer to push the process forward. You don't see that from your office. You see statistics, charts, crime numbers. There was no shouting, no sharp gestures, just a steady flow of observations, real-life accounts that couldn't be dismissed. The camera cut to Bondi. She looked down at her notes, then back up. Her tone softened, almost hesitant. Well, I think we both want the same thing, she said. Safer communities and stronger institutions. Jasmine didn't let the moment pass. Wanting the same thing doesn't mean we're doing the same work, she replied. Intentions matter, but impact matters more. The statement landed clearly. Even audience members who began skeptical weren't looking away. They were watching someone move past interruptions and prepared talking points, speaking with something harder to challenge. Lived experience supported by evidence. And Jasmine wasn't finished. Do you remember the case of Alonzo Brewer? She asked. Pam paused. She should have remembered. He spent 12 months in pretrial detention because he couldn't afford bond. Your prosecutors pushed for the maximum sentence on a minor possession charge. His public defender filed 5 motions to speed up the case. No response. Pam looked uncertain, as if trying to recall whether anyone had briefed her. He took a plea deal. Jasmine continued. He didn't even know he had the legal right to review the body cam footage. The audience remained silent. Bondi's expression tightened. That was your office, Jasmine said. That was your policy. She wasn't trying to embarrass her. She was making a point that couldn't be ignored. Sometimes a room shifts. Not tense, not relaxed, just uncertain. This was the first moment in the broadcast where Pam Bondi clearly didn't have an answer. She leaned back slightly, fingers tapping the stack of notes in front of her. The notes no longer mattered. The prepared points were far from the reality now being discussed. The name Alonzo Brewer carried weight. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a person, a real case connected directly to her office. Bondi wasn't used to these situations being raised publicly without warning, especially not on live television. Jasmine didn't react. She remained still, calm, hands folded, aware that the balance in the room had changed. The moderator leaned in carefully. Attorney General Bondi, would you like to respond? Pam cleared her throat, still trying to regain control. I'm not familiar with that specific case, she said, but I will make sure to review it. Jasmine raised one eyebrow, not judging, just surprised. He wrote to your office 4 times, she said. His sister called twice. His file wasn't even logged into the system for 3 months. Bondi looked off camera, collecting herself. Jasmine wasn't attacking. She was presenting clear, verifiable facts, and viewers across the country were watching. Social media reacted almost instantly. Clips of the exchange spread with captions like, "She came prepared. This is accountability." Bondi was effectively being briefed on her own office in front of millions. Pam tried to shift the conversation again. I take these matters seriously, she said. I know justice isn't perfect, but we must support our prosecutors and law enforcement who work under difficult conditions. It wasn't a poor statement. It just didn't address the moment. Jasmine leaned forward, speaking calmly. I know good officers too, she said. But justice can't only be about defending the system. It must include fixing it when it fails. Then she added something that quieted the room. I'm not trying to oppose you. I want to work with you, but I can't do that if your first response is to dismiss the realities I've spent my life trying to change. Pam didn't respond. The silence spoke for itself. The director held a single camera shot, no split screens, just 2 women at the table. One grounded in institutional authority, the other grounded in lived experience, both aware of the weight of the moment. The segment was scheduled for 15 minutes. It extended far beyond that, and no one wanted it to end. The moderator, clearly under pressure, simply said, We'll take a short break. The screen faded out. Across living rooms, break rooms, shops, and offices, people were already forming opinions. Regardless of their stance, most recognized that something had shifted in that room. The broadcast ended, but the national conversation continued. Within minutes, clips circulated widely, replayed, slowed down, analyzed. Viewers revisited Jasmine's responses and the exact moment Bondi's expression changed when the name Alonzo Brewer was mentioned. This wasn't just a viral clip. It reflected a brief moment of clarity in a media environment often filled with noise. A black woman entered a space where she was expected to be minimized and chose not to step back. Not with emotion, not with theatrics, but with facts. After the taping, Jasmine didn't reach for her phone. She sat quietly in the green room with her chief of staff. "You knew she'd challenge you," the staffer said. "I expected it," Jasmine replied. She often stayed quiet after interviews, letting her thoughts settle. Bondi left quickly. No follow-ups, no hallway conversations. Her aides moved efficiently, avoiding eye contact. Her communications director prepared a neutral statement, but it couldn't change what millions had already seen. In a diner near Columbus, two older women watched the replay. "She didn't raise her voice," one said. "She just presented the facts." The other nodded. "That's how it should be done." In Bakersfield, teenagers watched the clip with their mentor. "That's the kind of leader I want to be," one girl said quietly. Cable news covered the exchange throughout the night. Some described Jasmine as a rising voice. Others criticized her for being direct, but even critics acknowledged that she maintained clarity and control. By morning, she was trending, not for conflict, but for substance. One viewer wrote, "She didn't react emotionally. She explained clearly. Facts over noise." Jasmine did not engage with the attention. Her only post read, "Facts are not attacks." Short, direct, consistent with her approach. Later that week, she held a town hall in San Bernardino. No stage, no spotlight, just chairs and community members. When asked what it felt like to challenge Pam Bondi on national television, Jasmine responded, "It wasn't confrontation. It was correction. Some things can't go unaddressed anymore." People nodded. Whether they agreed with her or not, they understood the message: accountability, honesty, composure under pressure, and speaking with purpose. But one point stood out most. Days passed, and the clip continued to spread. Over 4 million views on one upload, with thousands of comments from across political lines. Many didn't share her views, but they respected her approach. One veteran wrote, "I expected emotion." She presented facts. But Jasmine wasn't focused on praise. She wanted people to remember the real names, the real cases, the real systems affecting everyday lives while public debates continue. At Southern University, she spoke with focus. "We need to stop assuming justice is equal for everyone," she told students. For many, that promise was never built with them in mind. She added, "It's not about what you say on camera. It's about what you stand for when no one is watching." That message stayed with people. This wasn't about defeating someone in debate. It wasn't about winning. Jasmine showed what it looks like to remain steady when underestimated, and the years it takes to build that steadiness. Pam Bondi never offered a detailed follow-up. A brief press release mentioned miscommunication and respectful dialogue, but the public had already formed its own conclusions about which voice carried more weight. Because when someone interrupts or dismisses you, reacting is easy. Maintaining composure with facts and patience is harder. And that's what Jasmine demonstrated. Not a moment for applause, but a model, a direction forward. Influence doesn't always come from volume. Sometimes it comes through direct questions, overlooked cases, and consistent truth. So if you're ever underestimated or dismissed, remember this. Preparation is stronger than reaction. Enter any room ready to clarify, not confront. Speak clearly, and let the facts lead. If this story connected with you, subscribe for more real people, real moments, and stories that continue beyond the headlines.